when Karen marched across my yard shouting about lake regulations. She had no idea she wasn't even standing on HOA property. But once I pulled out the survey and built my own dock, everything changed, including who paid to step on my land. Subscribe before you see how karma soaked her wallet. Make sure you stay till the end. The sun was still warming the lake's surface when I first noticed her. A woman in a red HOA-branded windbreaker, stomping along my shoreline with a clipboard in one hand and entitlement in the other. I had moved in just 2 weeks earlier, thrilled to find the perfect getaway outside of city noise. But the peace I'd hoped for cracked as soon as she opened her mouth and demanded to see my dock permit. A dock that didn't even exist yet. "This lake falls under HOA jurisdiction," she snapped. I blinked. My deed said otherwise. I had spent weeks working with my surveyor, checking boundaries, double-checking public maps. The lake, or at least the portion bordering my plot, had never belonged to the HOA. But this woman didn't care for facts. She cared for control. I told her politely that I wasn't a member of any HOA. That's when her tone shifted from annoyed to aggressive. She took pictures of my property line markers. She scribbled notes on her clipboard. "You can't build here without board approval," she barked. I calmly replied that I wasn't seeking any board's approval. My land was private. I had my rights. But she only muttered something about violations and stormed off, her footsteps stomping across the grass like warning shots. That night, I dug through every legal document I had: property survey, plat maps, historical zoning designations. I even called the county records office to confirm it again. The boundary was ironclad. My lot curved along the lake's edge, giving me over 60 feet of private waterfront. It had never and would never be part of the HOA's map. I was certain, but I knew Karen would return. And she did. A few days later, 2 men in reflective vests showed up with a measuring wheel and camera. "HOA compliance check," one of them said. I told them politely they were trespassing. I asked for documentation. They had none. I asked who sent them. One muttered, "Karen." I walked them back to the street and filed a report with the local sheriff. Enough was enough. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to just defend my rights. I was going to exercise them boldly. I called a local dock builder and scheduled the project. I'd install a long, beautiful wooden dock stretching 30 feet into the lake. Not only would it be legal, it would become the only safe access point for that side of the lake. The HOA didn't have one. I would. Word spread quickly. As construction began, HOA members walked by daily, pretending not to stare. A few muttered under their breath. One man stopped to ask, "Are you even allowed to build that?" I handed him a laminated copy of my deed and smiled. Karen herself drove by slowly each afternoon, her car crawling past like a silent accusation. I never waved. I just let the hammering speak for itself. Within 3 weeks, the dock was complete, reinforced, inspected, and approved by county codes. It had built-in seating, a shaded section, and enough space to launch a kayak or fish at sunset. I stood at the end of it one evening, watching the sun dip below the treeline, and I finally felt the peace I had hoped for when I moved here. But it didn't last long. A few days later, I found a note taped to my gate. "You are in violation of community rules. Fines may be assessed." It was unsigned, printed on HOA letterhead. But the funniest part? They had no legal power here. I laughed, folded it up, and dropped it into the shredder. Then I drafted my own letter, one that would turn everything in my favor. In that letter, I announced that, effective immediately, anyone from the HOA community wishing to use the dock, which happened to be the only safe access point to the lake, would need to request permission and pay a maintenance fee. It was within my rights. And I was about to teach Karen what happens when you try to bully someone standing on solid ground. Literally. By midweek, my maintenance fee policy had become the center of whispered gossip along the lakeside trail. A few HOA families had started sending polite emails. Mostly curiosity, no hostility. They just wanted to know how much. I kept it reasonable. $100 per household per season. It wasn't about the money. It was about principle. I was paying to maintain something they had no right to, but would surely use. They'd made it clear I wasn't one of them, so I responded accordingly. But Karen didn't write. She showed up. Again. This time, she stood on the public walking path, arms crossed, eyes squinting like I'd stolen a piece of her soul. "You can't charge people for lake access," she said coldly. I told her once again it wasn't lake access I was charging for. It was my dock, my structure, my land. She stammered, trying to twist words, but her fury wasn't about logic. It was about losing control. That night, I installed a gate at the entrance of the dock. A black wrought iron gate with a coated lock, mounted into the wooden frame. It wasn't just functional, it was symbolic. No more ambiguous boundaries. No more casual wanderers. No more HOA arrogance spilling onto what they didn't own. I took a picture of it the next morning, uploaded it to the neighborhood forum, and titled the post, "Dock Access for Non-HOA Property. Contact for Seasonal Use." The comments exploded. Some angry, some amused, many confused. "Wait, you're not in the HOA?" one neighbor wrote. "I thought the lake was community-owned?" another questioned. And that was the root of the myth, the belief that the HOA controlled more than it truly did. Karen had built her entire persona around that illusion, and I had just shattered it one steel hinge at a time. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived from the HOA legal committee. Inside was a cease and desist claim stating I was disrupting community use and creating a hostile lakeside atmosphere. I laughed. It was legally meaningless. The HOA had no jurisdiction over me, and their committee couldn't enforce anything off their map. I knew it. My attorney confirmed it. Still, I kept the letter, evidence of their desperation. Ironically, Karen's plan to punish me had backfired. While trying to intimidate me out of building, she had exposed just how weak the HOA's grasp truly was. More importantly, she had unwittingly promoted my dock. Families began contacting me, quietly, privately, asking for weekend passes. Some even offered to help with maintenance in lieu of payment. I agreed. I welcomed them, just not her. Then came the town meeting. Not the HOAs, the actual town councils. An agenda item had been added, discussion on dock usage and community water access. I attended. Karen did too. She spoke first, loudly claiming I had commercialized the lakefront and was violating the spirit of the neighborhood. I waited, listened, and when my turn came, I calmly showed maps, deeds, permits, and photos. I proved that the HOA's boundary line stopped 23 feet before my gate. I explained how I'd paid every county fee, followed every regulation. The room was quiet. Karen stared ahead, mouth tight, hands trembling. The final blow came when a council member asked her, "Can you show us any legal claim your HOA has over his dock?" She said nothing, because there was nothing. The town ruled in my favor. Officially, publicly, a note would be added to the next city bulletin clarifying that my dock was not, and had never been, part of HOA jurisdiction. Karen didn't wait for the meeting to end. She left in silence, her shoulders drawn in defeat. I watched her car pull out of the lot, then shook hands with the councilman. That night, I returned home, walked down to my dock under a velvet sky, and unlocked the gate. I stood at the edge, letting the lake's reflection flicker in my eyes. Behind me, my land. Ahead, peace. And for the first time since Karen's first intrusion, I felt something different. Not victory, not smugness, just relief. She had tried to gatekeep the water. But now I held the only key. I first noticed the sign on a cloudy Tuesday afternoon, bright yellow, nailed to a wooden stake in Karen's front yard. Permit application, HOA community dock extension. At first glance, it looked official. I walked closer, squinting. It listed a proposal to build a new community dock, directly across from mine. A bold move and one that reeked of retaliation. They weren't giving up. They were trying to compete. But what caught my attention wasn't the dock. It was the line that read, Public-Private Access Partnership. That phrase was a legal gamble. It meant they were trying to use HOA funds to build on public land, which, in this case, included part of a preserved wetland buffer behind Karen's home. I took a photo and sent it to my attorney. His reply came within 10 minutes. They're playing with fire. I spent the next 2 days gathering documentation. County wetland maps, satellite overlays, old zoning approvals. My house wasn't just outside HOA limits. It bordered protected conservation land. And that meant one thing. Any construction near it required multiple environmental assessments, none of which the HOA had. Karen had stirred up more than a rivalry. She had poked the hornet's nest of county compliance. When the environmental inspector arrived the following Monday, he barely had to walk 20 feet onto the site before shaking his head. "There's no way this passes," he muttered. Karen stood at the edge of her property, arms folded tightly, lips pursed. I watched from across the street as he pointed toward flagged trees and red tape, explaining violations. She didn't speak, but her face told the whole story. 2 days later, the county placed a stop work order on the site, bright red, laminated, and stapled right over her permit sign. It flapped in the wind like a scarlet letter. Karen didn't come out of her house that day, nor the next. Rumors spread fast. Some neighbors began privately apologizing to me. Others asked if I could give them a tour of my dock. I nodded politely, but I wasn't celebrating, not yet. That Friday evening, I received an email from the HOA board. It was brief. "We would like to request a private conversation regarding dock access and future cooperation." I read it twice. Cooperation? After months of threats, fake permits, and legal games? My gut said no. But my conscience said yes just once. I agreed to meet their representative on neutral ground. The town hall. The meeting was civil. Their tone was changed. Apparently, several residents had raised concerns about dues being wasted on failed construction. Karen, it turned out, had been the one pushing the project. Without consensus, without permission, without legal footing. Now, the HOA wanted to make peace. They offered to officially acknowledge that my property and dock were out of bounds. No more claims. No more mail. No more drama. I asked for it in writing. They agreed. 3 days later, a notarized statement arrived. The HOA had no authority over my land, dock, or lake access, and they would cease all further communications unless initiated by me. I read it 3 times, placed it in a waterproof sleeve, and locked it in the same drawer that held my original deed. Closure was beginning to take shape. That weekend, something unexpected happened. A group of neighborhood kids approached the dock, timid, polite, and curious. They asked if they could fish from the edge for just an hour. I smiled, unlocked the gate, and told them they could stay as long as they respected the place. Their joy was quiet, grateful. It reminded me why I'd built the dock in the first place. Not to gatekeep, but to protect something good. As dusk fell, I stood at the edge once again, watching soft ripples touch the posts. Somewhere behind the trees, Karen's porch light flickered, but the silence held. No yelling, no emails, no threats, just the sound of water and distant laughter. In her rush to dominate, she had lost more than control. She had lost trust. And I had gained something far more valuable than property. I'd reclaimed my peace. Summer faded into a crisp autumn, and with it came a silence I hadn't known in years. Karen's war had vanished like fog off the lake, but in the stillness, something else began to stir. Whispers from within the HOA itself. The upcoming board elections were no longer just a formality. A growing number of residents, previously silent, were now openly dissatisfied. It wasn't just about me. Karen's decisions had left a deeper bruise. The HOA's finances had taken a hit. Between legal fees, permit penalties, and the abandoned dock project, over $40,000 in reserves had been burned. Word leaked that dues might increase. That was the final straw for many. Flyers began appearing in mailboxes, calling for reform. And for the first time in a decade, someone dared to run against Karen. A soft-spoken retiree named Miriam, who had lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone. Miriam didn't campaign with anger. She walked door to door with handwritten notes and spoke only of transparency, unity, and respect for all residents, including non-HOA neighbors. I watched her from my window once, passing out warm apple bread to families who once backed Karen. She never knocked on my door. But I knew deep down this election wasn't just about the HOA. It was a reckoning of the damage one person's obsession could cause. On the night of the vote, the meeting room was packed. Folding chairs overflowed into the hallway. I didn't attend. I had no vote after all. But I could feel the tension radiate from across the lake. By 9 p.m., the results were public. Miriam had won in a landslide. Karen was removed from the board, her position stripped, her reputation in pieces. She didn't return home that night. In fact, she didn't return for several. Her house went dark. The once neatly manicured hedges turned dry and untrimmed. A "For Sale by Owner" sign appeared discreetly on the edge of her yard one rainy afternoon. No open house. No explanation. Just silence. Neighbors stopped asking. It was understood. She was done. The HOA was rebuilding, slowly, cautiously, and I was no longer a name on their blacklist. I was just the man across the lake. My dock stood strong. I repainted the boards that fall, sealing them against winter rain. Each stroke felt like therapy, as if covering the cracks of conflict and history with something calmer. Occasionally, a few neighbors wandered over to fish or sit at the edge. I never turned them away. If anything, the dock became a quiet bridge between two once warring shores. The sheriff I had once met showed up one day off-duty, in plain clothes. He waved, asked if he could sit. We watched the water in silence for several minutes before he muttered, "I saw what they did. You handled it better than most would've." I didn't respond, just nodded. Some truths didn't need retelling. They hung in the air, obvious to those who lived them. That winter, with snow dusting the trees and mist rising from the lake at dawn, I realized something had shifted. The land, the water, the air. It all felt mine again. Not as property, but as a place of belonging. Karen had tried to rewrite borders, enforce invisible lines of power. But in the end, the land had outlasted her ambition. It always does. I received one final letter in January, not from the HOA, but from a neighbor. A thank you card, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a note. "Thank you for standing firm. You reminded us that rules don't make a community. People do." I placed it in my drawer, next to the deed and the cease and desist. Not out of pride, but as a reminder that peace is never won by force, only by resolve. Now, when I walk the shoreline at sunrise, I no longer look over my shoulder. There are no strange cars, no construction crews, no flyers taped to my mailbox. Just the lake, calm and silver, holding stories only the water remembers. And in that silence, I find what Karen never could, a quiet kind of victory.